Let me begin with the sort of dilemma that I had when I was approached and asked to sit on this panel, because this idea, the two extremes, banning or tolerating, it does seem to me that neither of those really is the sort of direction that one wants to go in. One can defend free speech while also maintaining that there are boundaries to free speech. There is unlawful speech, and that is covered by existing legislation. And I'll say a little bit in a moment about how that relates to a particular issue with which I've been involved and in which anti-Semitism has been cited as a major reason for not proceeding with new legislation, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which was signed into law last year. Now, the boundaries, it's not difficult to find where those boundaries are. Threats of physical violence, the expression of the wish to exterminate Jews in this particular case, and from the river to the sea, sometimes that has been expressed as the total displacement by whatever means of the Jewish population of Israel. The question of Holocaust denial has also come up. Michelle Donnellan made a bad mistake in appearing to suggest that it might be possible, once the act was passed, for people to get up and indulge in that. That is something that has to be adequately policed, but it is covered by existing legislation, as was pointed out to her. So where do we draw the line? We might say, well, I feel uncomfortable about this. Jewish students might feel uncomfortable about the way in which Israel is perhaps being described by a lecturer in their faculty or department. Feeling uncomfortable, because this is something that all of us who've been engaged with the free speech question in universities, we're very aware that it takes us into some rather tricky areas, the whole question of trigger warnings and so on. It'd be very interesting to hear views about how one deals with students feeling uncomfortable about anti-Semitism, about Israel. But let me mention one other document. I've mentioned the Higher Education Act, and the other document is the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually looked at it, but if you actually call it up online, you will find an extremely short document, which it seems to me is quite satisfactory. You will also find appended to it a number of examples of what in the view of those who composed the document, examples of what constitutes anti-Semitic activity or speech. And it's there, actually, that we get into a difficult area, because we might disagree with some of them. Perhaps some of those about Israel have caused more controversy than others, the idea that the Jews are in control of the world economy and so on. But it's more on the Israel side that there's tended to be a debate, even within Jewish circles, about what is in this document. But what I want to stress is not that particular problem. It's what seems to me the obvious fact that if a university or any other institution adopts the IHRA definition, it's a question of what is it actually doing? And what it is doing is it is saying, here are some guidelines that we intend to respect. Thinking of it in terms of guidelines, not in terms of something that is legally enforceable. And this is actually very important, because there are other issues, connected issues to do with a legal definition of Islamophobia, for instance, which come into the frame when the question of anti-Semitism is mentioned, and which are very, very problematic. So fine for universities to say that they wish to work within this. And also, it enables me to say that if, for instance, Jeremy Corbyn makes a certain statement about the friends he has in his own circles, I am entitled to say this is an anti-Semitic statement within the terms of the IHRA definition. I don't think there's anything that is libelous or slanderous in doing that, not that I'm a lawyer. But let's go back to the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. And here we're looking at a document which has caused enormous perplexity within the Jewish community. The President of the Board of Deputies, the President of the Union of Jewish Students, have appealed to the Secretary of State not to implement the Act, and that's exactly what we saw just a few days before it was due to be implemented on the 1st of August. They had success in their attempt to do that. And they argued that the Act would actually encourage anti-Semitism on campus. And this is something which I simply have to say I do not understand. It seems to me, if you actually look at what the Act is, it has, if anything, the opposite effect. Because what the Act is doing is it's providing certain guarantees. It's guaranteeing that universities, if a speaker comes, let's say the ambassador of Israel, her security has to be guaranteed by the university, has to be paid for by the university. So a student society which cannot afford to fund the security will not be left having to cancel the event. And we have seen exactly that happen just within the last few days with Suella Braverman's attempt to visit Cambridge and to give an address, which was cancelled because the Conservative Association could not afford £1,500 of security. Under the Act, that would actually be covered. And so we're looking at mechanisms which actually shore up the existing legislation. We're looking at a system of free in the sense of nothing to pay, appeals that one can make to the free speech Tsar, Arif Ahmed, who's now in a sort of suspended role, not knowing what's going to happen to him. It's very important. In fact, I'm probably going to see Jackie Smith, the relevant minister, in just about 10 days' time. It's very important to put across to the government that they have totally misconstrued what the impact of this act on anti-Semitism would be. And that they've been, for some reason, these Jewish organizations, it's very difficult to understand, themselves have been led by the nose into believing that something actually rather good for Jewish students is incredibly bad.